Before closing a period in purchase order, it is important to reconcile the purchases clearing account balance with the open amounts on purchase orders. When reconciling this account, it is also important to understand which transactions affect the account. You can do this at any time, but you should definitely do it before reconciling and closing your period. You need to realize that every product line has a purchases clearing account. In this company, every product line has the same purchases clearing account. If you did have different purchases clearing account, you would need to make sure that you were reconciling each of those accounts. So the objective is to reconcile the purchases clearing account and the trial balance to the general ledger control accounts. You'll use the purchases clearing report on the period end menu to simplify month-end reconciliation of the purchases clearing account balance with open amounts on the purchase order. You'll then run the general ledger trial balance to compare. If they match, you're balanced. If they don't match, you may be out of balance, and there's a number of places to look. Inventory receipts might have been entered in the inventory module using transaction entry. The ordered quantity or unit cost might have been changed after performing either receipt of goods entry or receipt of invoice entry. Manual postings may have been made directly to the purchases clearing account. Receipt of goods or receipt of invoice registers have been updated to an incorrect general ledger period. So our first step is to run the purchases clearing report. You'll find that on the period end menu, and you can run either the purchases clearing or the purchases clearing in open PO format. Since all of my product lines have the same purchases clearing account, I'll default to bringing in all of the items, and I'm going to bring in inventory items. Now when I look at the total in my purchases clearing account, I see $8,889. The amount that should be in your purchases clearing is the value from the quantity ordered minus the quantity invoiced. So now I'll compare that to general ledger. And into the general ledger trial balance, and I want to pull in my purchases clearing account. And I'll preview this. And my total is the same, $8,889. So I'm in balance in this company. But let's look at another example. So again, going to purchase order, into the period end, into the purchases clearing report. Also in this company, they're using the same purchases clearing account for all product lines. And when I look at the value here, I see $3,730.09. So let's now again go back to general ledger and run the general ledger trial balance. And we can see this amount doesn't balance to what we saw in the purchases clearing. They don't match, so I'm out of balance. Now what do I do? The first thing I want to do is run the general ledger detail report. So in general ledger, under reports, I'll find the general ledger detail report. I could also run it by source, but that's not necessarily going to give me what I need. I'll go ahead and put in my account number. And preview this report. Now I'm looking for transactions that weren't made in the purchase order module that might affect inventory. So the very first thing I see is a receipt that was done in inventory for $171,250. I see a receipt in purchase order. I see some adjustments in general ledger. I see a receipt in purchase order, an invoice receipt in purchase order, And actually, if I look at these values and add them up and subtract that $171,250, it looks like I might be pretty close. So I'll close this. And now what do we do? So now we need to correct this by recording an invoice in accounts payable to offset the purchases clearing account. We know that the receipt was done in inventory, so most likely there was no invoice in this case. So I can fix this by going into accounts payable and entering the vendor invoice. Remember, the goods have already been received, and I'll offset that to the purchases clearing. It's very likely that when the goods were received using the inventory transaction, that they were posted to the correct accounts. To do that, I'll go into accounts payable, into the main, into invoice data entry. I'll select my vendor that I bought these goods from and enter the invoice. I'll put in that amount, and now I'll go to the Lines tab and change this GL account to the Purchases Clearing account. So this invoice should have been entered into purchase order to receive it in, and that would have offset. But we discovered that it wasn't done that way. So we're going to go ahead and accept. And now let's go ahead and post this. And here's our entry that we need to have made. And we'll update the invoice register and go into the daily transaction register to update general ledger. So let's go back into purchase order and rerun the purchases clearing report and remind us of what was there. So our amount was $3,730.09. And now let's go back to general ledger to compare that against the trial balance. And preview. And we can see that this amount is $3,730.09. So now we're in balance. Now that's just one example of what might happen. Let's review another possible situation. Another common situation is that an invoice might have entered in accounts payable that should have been entered in purchase order. The recommended process is that you process the receipt of invoice, giving it a unique number in purchase order, and then adjust the invoice in accounts payable to 0. There may be other reasons that you become out of balance. These are the most common. You can always check Sage City to find other additional corrections for your situation if one of these two does not work.